Okay, 8.8 resolution, the 3/5 compromise. The resolution is became to a solution, the Congress, to decide. Remember, they're creating the Constitution, and they couldn't decide on how a slave should be counted as a representative of a state. Remember, it was based on population, how many representatives that they would have in the House or in the House of Representatives. So they had to kind of come to a compromise about how to count a slave, because they could not agree. The South, like the smaller states, yes, they wanted to count the slaves, but the North was like, well, slavery is bad, so we don't really want to have you count them, and we're going to have, if you count them, then they're going to be taxed. So they were kind of arguing about that. All right, let's read this and go over what you need to know. After a bitter debate, Madison proposed a compromise. Count each slave as 3/5 of a person, he suggested, when determining a state's population. The delegates approved this idea, known as the 3/5 compromise. Declaring a slave to be 3/5 of a person made a mockery of the statement in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. Still, the delegates adopted the compromise because it seemed the only way to keep the convention moving forward. Control of trade. Another question about slavery was raised by a dispute over trade. Northern delegates favored giving Congress broad power to control trade between the states and other countries. They believed that this power would be used to help business in the North. This proposal made Southern delegates nervous. They worried that Congress might try to tax Southern export crops such as rice and tobacco. We almost shuddered, wrote James McHenry of Maryland, at the fate of the commerce trade of Maryland, should we be unable to make a change in this extraordinary power. Southerners also worried that Congress would use its power over trade to outlaw the slave trade, the importing of slaves from Africa. Ending the slave trade. Southerners had reason to fear this. By 1787, several states had already outlawed the slave trade within their boundaries, and a majority of the convention's delegates, including many Southerners, favored ending the slave trade completely. 2 states, however, objected that their economies would collapse without a constant supply of fresh slaves. Southern Carolina and Georgia cannot do without slaves, said Charles Pinckney of South Carolina. Neither state would agree to any constitution and threaten the slave trade. Again, the delegates settled on a compromise. The Southern delegates agreed to give Congress power to control trade, but with 2 limitations. First, Congress could not place any tax on exports going to other countries. Second, Congress could not interfere with the slave trade for 20 years or until 1808. After that time, the importing of slaves into the United States could be forbidden. All right, so the questions in your packet for 8.8, how would slaves be counted for representation numbers in Congress? 3/5 of a free person when determining representation. And then also you're going to need to identify the compromise. No taxes on exports. Congress can't interfere with the slave trade until 1808. Congress now controls trade, not the states. So, I'm trying to see if there's something else missing. All right. That's the end of 8.8.